Behind the gilded gates of Windsor Castle, a phone call at 3:47 a.m. would change everything. The heir to the British throne, Prince William, stood in his pajamas as security details rushed through moonlit corridors. What started as whispers in tabloid newsrooms had exploded into a constitutional crisis that would test the very foundations of the monarchy. By dawn, millions would wake to headlines that shook the Commonwealth. The Prince of Wales faced a choice that no royal training had prepared him for: protect his family's secrets or save the crown itself. In the digital age, where scandals spread faster than wildfire and public opinion can topple institutions overnight, William discovered that being born to rule meant nothing if you couldn't earn the right to lead. This is the untold story of 48 hours that redefined the British royal family forever. A story of courage found in crisis, of a future king who learned that true leadership isn't inherited, it's proven when everything you hold dear hangs in the balance. The crown was never heavier than it was in 26, and William was about to discover if he was strong enough to carry it. The first sign of trouble came not through official channels, but through a text message that would make Prince William's blood run cold. At exactly 11:47 p.m. on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday in March 2026, his phone buzzed with a message from his private secretary that simply read, "Sir, we have a situation. Please call immediately." William had been reviewing briefing papers for his upcoming visit to South Africa when the message arrived. Catherine was already asleep beside him, exhausted from a full day of royal engagements across London. The soft glow of his phone illuminated their bedroom at Kensington Palace, where family photos lined the dresser and children's artwork hung proudly on the walls. This was their sanctuary, the one place where they could simply be William and Catherine rather than the Prince and Princess of Wales. The phone call that followed would shatter that peace forever. His private secretary's voice was tense, carefully controlled in the way that palace staff had perfected over decades of managing royal crises. "Sir, we've received word that several major news outlets are preparing to run coordinated stories tomorrow morning. The content, it involves multiple members of the family." William felt his stomach drop. In the modern age of social media and instant communication, royal scandals didn't unfold slowly like they had in his grandmother's era. They exploded across the digital landscape with devastating speed and accuracy. "How bad?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer from the tremor in his secretary's usually steady voice. "Sir, I think it's best if we discuss this in person. Can you come to the office?" The drive through London's empty streets gave William time to think, though his mind raced with possibilities. The past year had been challenging for the royal family. His father, King Charles III, had been dealing with ongoing health issues that had kept him largely out of the public eye. The burden of royal duties had increasingly fallen on William's shoulders, a responsibility he had embraced but one that came with immense pressure. The palace corridors echoed with his footsteps as he made his way to the crisis management room, a secure space deep within the building where the family's most sensitive matters were handled. Inside, he found not just his private secretary, but also the palace's head of communications, the family's legal advisor, and most concerning of all, representatives from the Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Unit. The briefing that followed was unlike anything William had ever experienced. Over the next 2 hours, he learned that investigative journalists from 3 different countries had been working together on what they called Operation Crown Jewels, a coordinated effort to expose what they claimed were serious irregularities in royal finances, personal conduct, and institutional practices.
The allegations were staggering in their scope and detail.
Financial investigators had uncovered questionable transactions linked to royal properties and investments. Personal conduct allegations involved multiple family members and spanned several years. Most damaging of all were claims about institutional cover-ups and the use of royal influence to silence critics and suppress unfavorable coverage. As dawn approached, William found himself facing the kind of crisis that had historically brought down monarchies. The evidence presented to him was detailed, well-sourced, and appeared to have been gathered over months, if not years, of careful investigation. This wasn't tabloid gossip or speculation. It was serious journalism backed by documents, financial records, and multiple sources. The communications team had already begun damage control, reaching out to editors and attempting to negotiate delays or modifications to the planned coverage. But the journalists involved had anticipated this response and had carefully structured their investigation to be legally bulletproof. They had followed every ethical guideline and had given the palace multiple opportunities to respond to their questions. Opportunities that had been largely ignored or deflected. By 6 a.m., advance copies of newspapers were already being distributed across London. The internet had begun buzzing with rumors and leaked information. Social media algorithms were picking up on unusual royal-related search patterns. The storm was beginning, and William realized that traditional palace crisis management strategies were inadequate for the digital age reality they now faced. The weight of his position hit him fully as he stood in the crisis room, surrounded by advisors whose faces reflected the gravity of the situation. He was no longer just Prince William, second in line to the throne. He was the de facto leader of an institution under unprecedented attack, and every decision he made in the coming hours would determine not just his own future, but the future of the monarchy itself. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Catherine, who had woken to find him gone. "Where are you? Is everything all right?" The simple question from his wife reminded him of what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about preserving an institution or protecting a family legacy. It was about protecting the people he loved and ensuring a stable future for his children. The head of communications approached with the latest update. Major television networks were preparing special coverage. International media was scrambling to match the breaking story. Government officials were being briefed. The Archbishop of Canterbury's office had called, seeking clarification. The Commonwealth realms were asking for guidance on how to respond to inevitable questions from their own media. William made his first crucial decision of the crisis. Rather than hiding behind palace walls and traditional no-comment responses, he would face this head-on. He instructed his team to prepare for full transparency and cooperation with legitimate media inquiries. This was a radical departure from decades of royal protocol, but he understood that the old ways of managing royal crises were no longer viable in an age where information traveled at the speed of light. The next few hours would test every aspect of his preparation for kingship. His military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure. His years of royal duties had shown him how to project stability and confidence even in difficult circumstances. His education had given him the analytical skills to break down complex problems and find solutions. But nothing had truly prepared him for the unique challenge of preserving a 1,000-year-old institution while adapting it for a 21st-century world. As the sun rose over London on what would become known as Black Wednesday in royal circles, William stood at the window of the crisis room looking out at a city beginning to wake up. Soon, millions of people would learn details about his family that had been carefully guarded for years. The carefully maintained image of royal perfection was about to be shattered, and it would be his job to pick up the pieces and build something new from the wreckage. His phone displayed dozens of missed calls and hundreds of unread messages. News vans were already gathering outside palace gates. Security had been quietly increased around all royal residences. The Prime Minister's office was requesting an urgent meeting. International allies were seeking reassurance about the stability of their key partner. The crisis was no longer theoretical or manageable through traditional means. It was real, it was immediate, and it required a response that would either save the monarchy or accelerate its decline. William took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and turned back to his team. The most important day in royal history since his grandmother's death was just beginning, and he was the only person who could navigate the family through it. The future of the British crown now rested entirely on the decisions he would make in the hours to come. The first headline appeared on the BBC News website at exactly 7 a.m. Royal family under investigation. Exclusive documents reveal financial irregularities. Within minutes, the story had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms. The digital avalanche had begun. William watched from the communication center as real-time monitoring systems tracked the spread of the story across the globe. What had taken days or weeks to unfold in previous royal crises was now happening in real time, with updates, commentary, and speculation flooding the internet faster than any human response could match. The journalists had timed their revelations perfectly. The stories broke simultaneously in the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and the United States, ensuring global coverage and making it impossible for the palace to contain the damage to any single market or time zone. Each publication had focused on different aspects of the investigation, creating a comprehensive picture that was far more damaging than any single story could have been. Catherine arrived at the palace shortly after 8 a.m., having left their children with trusted staff at Kensington Palace. Her usual composed demeanor showed cracks of strain as she absorbed the scale of the crisis. "How bad is it really?" she asked William privately, away from the assembled crisis team. William's answer was honest and direct. The allegations included financial improprieties dating back over a decade, involving offshore investments and property transactions that appeared designed to minimize tax obligations. Personal conduct issues involved several family members and included allegations of using royal influence to silence critics and suppress negative coverage. Most seriously, there were claims that the institution itself had systematically covered up various incidents and had pressured government officials to avoid investigation. The evidence supporting these allegations appeared solid. Documents had been obtained through Freedom of Information requests, whistleblower disclosures, and careful financial analysis. Multiple sources had provided corroborating information. Legal experts consulted by the journalists had confirmed that the activities described appeared to violate both tax regulations and ethical guidelines governing public institutions. By 9 a.m., the palace switchboard was overwhelmed with media requests. Protest groups had begun gathering outside royal residences. Social media was filled with hashtags calling for royal accountability. Political opponents of the monarchy were demanding parliamentary investigations. International observers were questioning the stability of one of the world's oldest institutions. William's first public appearance of the crisis came at 10:30 a.m., when he emerged from Kensington Palace to address the gathered media. His decision to speak publicly rather than hiding behind written statements marked a significant departure from royal protocol. Standing before dozens of cameras and microphones, he looked directly into the lens of the BBC camera and spoke with calm determination. "I am aware of the serious allegations that have been made public today," he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "These matters deserve thorough investigation and complete transparency. As future king, I have a duty to ensure that the royal family operates with the highest standards of integrity and accountability." The brief statement sent shockwaves through both the media and the royal establishment. Previous royal responses to crises had been carefully crafted to avoid admitting any wrongdoing, while promising vague cooperation with appropriate authorities. William's approach was different. He had essentially acknowledged that there were legitimate questions to be answered, and had committed the family to full cooperation with investigations. Inside the palace, senior advisors were divided on William's approach. Traditional palace courtiers argued for a more defensive strategy, emphasizing the family's service to the nation and questioning the motives of their accusers. Younger communications specialists, however, supported William's instinct that transparency was the only viable path forward in the digital age. The immediate public response to William's statement was mixed but generally positive. Polling conducted throughout the day showed that while trust in the royal family had declined significantly since the morning's revelations, William's personal approval ratings remained relatively stable. The public appeared to appreciate his direct approach and willingness to address the crisis head-on. International reactions were more concerning. Government officials in Commonwealth realms were facing difficult questions about their continued association with the British Crown. Republican movements in Australia and Canada saw the crisis as an opportunity to advance their causes. Financial markets showed nervousness about potential political instability in one of the world's major economies. Behind the scenes, William was coordinating with government officials to ensure that the crisis didn't spill over into broader constitutional questions. The Prime Minister's office was working to separate the government's operations from the royal family's personal affairs, but the interconnected nature of British institutions made this challenging. The afternoon brought new developments as investigative teams from multiple news organizations published follow-up stories with additional details. Financial experts began analyzing the documents that had been made public, confirming that the tax strategies employed appeared to push the boundaries of legal acceptability. Legal scholars debated whether some of the alleged activities might constitute criminal violations. Social media sentiment analysis showed that younger generations were particularly critical of the royal family's conduct, while older Britons remained more supportive despite their concern about the allegations. This generational divide reflected broader debates about the monarchy's relevance in modern Britain and raised questions about the institution's long-term viability. William spent much of the afternoon in private meetings with individual family members, seeking to understand the full scope of the crisis and coordinate a unified response. These conversations were difficult, as some family members had been directly implicated in the allegations, while others had been kept unaware of potentially problematic activities. The king's health complications added another layer of complexity to the crisis. Palace medical advisors recommended minimal stress and a limited role in crisis management, effectively placing the entire burden on William's shoulders. This situation highlighted the institutional vulnerability that had developed as Charles's health had declined and William had gradually assumed more responsibilities. Evening news broadcasts led with comprehensive coverage of the royal crisis, bringing the story to millions of viewers who might have missed the morning's online coverage. Television journalists provided context and analysis that helped the public understand the broader implications of the allegations. International news networks framed the story as a potential turning point for one of the world's most famous monarchies. As night fell on the first day of the crisis, William found himself in an unprecedented position. He was effectively leading both the royal family and the broader institution of monarchy through its greatest challenge in decades. The traditional support systems and crisis management protocols had proven inadequate for the speed and scale of a modern media crisis. The palace communications team was working around the clock to respond to media inquiries, coordinate with government officials, and monitor public sentiment. Legal advisors were reviewing documents and preparing for potential investigations. Security officials were assessing threats and adjusting protection protocols based on increased public attention. Throughout it all, William maintained his focus on the central challenge, preserving the monarchy's legitimacy while addressing legitimate public concerns about royal conduct. This balance required him to move beyond traditional royal responses and embrace a level of transparency that made many within the palace establishment uncomfortable. The first day of the crisis had established the parameters of the challenge. The allegations were serious, well-documented, and could not be dismissed or deflected through traditional means. The public's response would depend largely on how William and the royal family addressed these concerns in the days to come. As he prepared for what he knew would be a sleepless night of planning and preparation, William understood that the monarchy's survival might depend on his ability to transform a centuries-old institution while preserving its essential purpose and dignity. The crown had never felt heavier, and the path forward had never been less certain. The second day dawned with newspaper headlines that were even more damaging than the first. Royal family tax schemes. How the crown avoided millions in public obligations dominated the front pages across the Commonwealth. The journalists had saved their most explosive evidence for the second wave, understanding that sustained coverage was necessary to create lasting impact. William's day began at 5 a.m., with an emergency briefing from his legal team. Overnight analysis of the published documents had revealed that some of the financial arrangements dated back to his late grandmother's reign, meaning the current crisis had roots stretching back decades. This historical dimension made the situation exponentially more complex, as it suggested systematic rather than isolated problems. The most damaging revelation of the second day involved offshore trust arrangements that had been used to hold royal properties and investments. These structures, while technically legal, appeared designed to minimize tax obligations and shield assets from public scrutiny. Financial experts quoted in the morning's coverage estimated that these arrangements may have saved the royal family tens of millions of pounds in taxes that would otherwise have been paid to the same government that provided their official funding. Catherine joined William for a private breakfast meeting at 6:30 a.m., their first opportunity to discuss the crisis away from advisors and staff. The conversation was frank and difficult. Both understood that their children's future had been fundamentally altered by the events of the past 24 hours. The comfortable certainty of royal life had been replaced by unprecedented uncertainty about the monarchy's survival. "Whatever happens, we protect the children," Catherine said firmly, referring to their 3 young ones who were still largely unaware of the storm engulfing their family. William nodded, knowing that maintaining some semblance of normal family life would be crucial for their psychological well-being during the turbulent period ahead. The morning brought a steady stream of meetings with advisors, government officials, and senior clergy. The Archbishop of Canterbury's visit was particularly significant, as the Church of England's relationship with the monarchy was fundamental to the institution's constitutional role. The Archbishop expressed support for William's transparency approach, but warned that public trust in both institutions was being severely tested. Parliament was scheduled to debate the royal crisis that afternoon, marking the first time in modern history that MPs would formally discuss allegations against the royal family. Opposition parties had called for a full investigation, while government supporters sought to separate the monarchy as an institution from the personal conduct of individual royals. International pressure was mounting throughout the morning. The President of the European Commission had called for full accountability from British institutions. Republican movements in Commonwealth realms were organising protests and demanding constitutional reviews. Financial markets continued to show nervousness about potential political instability. William's most difficult challenge came at 11 a.m., when he met privately with representatives from the Treasury and His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. The government officials had been tasked with conducting a preliminary review of the financial allegations and had concluded that formal investigations would be necessary. This meant that the royal family would face the same scrutiny applied to any other citizen suspected of tax irregularities. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The royal family, which served as the ultimate symbol of British law and order, was now subject to investigation by the very institutions they represented. William understood that cooperating fully with these investigations was essential for preserving any hope of restored public trust. The afternoon parliamentary debate was broadcast live and watched by millions. Opposition MPs delivered scathing attacks on royal privilege and called for fundamental constitutional reform. Government supporters defended the monarchy's overall contribution to British society while acknowledging the need to address specific allegations. The debate was passionate but largely respectful, reflecting the gravity of the constitutional moment. William watched the parliamentary proceedings from his private office, accompanied by constitutional experts who provided real-time analysis of the legal and political implications. The consensus among these advisers was that the monarchy could survive the current crisis, but only if the royal family demonstrated genuine accountability and implemented meaningful reforms. The turning point of the day came at 3 p.m. when William received a call from his father. King Charles, despite his health challenges, had been following the crisis closely and wanted to provide guidance to his heir. The conversation lasted nearly an hour and proved to be crucial in shaping William's subsequent approach. Charles shared his perspective on previous royal crises and emphasized the importance of protecting the institution even when individual family members might face consequences. He also expressed regret for any decisions made during his own tenure that had contributed to the current situation. Most importantly, he gave William explicit authority to make whatever changes were necessary to preserve the monarchy's future. Armed with his father's support, William convened an emergency meeting of senior royals and their closest advisers. The gathering included representatives from all major royal households and was designed to coordinate a unified response to the crisis. The meeting was tense, as some family members resented the increased scrutiny, while others supported William's transparency approach. The discussion revealed the full scope of problematic activities and decisions stretching back years. Some family members had been unaware of the financial arrangements that were now causing public outrage. Others had raised concerns privately but had been overruled by senior advisers who prioritized tax efficiency over public perception. William's leadership during this family meeting proved crucial. He listened carefully to all perspectives, but made clear that the old approaches were no longer viable. The family would need to accept short-term damage to their reputations in exchange for the possibility of long-term institutional survival. The evening brought another wave of media coverage, as journalists published additional documents and expert analysis. Television news programs featured extensive discussions about the monarchy's future, with constitutional scholars offering varying perspectives on potential reforms. Public opinion polls showed continued erosion of trust but also suggested that William's handling of the crisis was preventing complete collapse of royal support. International coverage was increasingly focused on the broader implications for Commonwealth relationships and constitutional monarchy. Political scientists in university programs worldwide were analyzing the crisis as a potential case study in institutional adaptation under pressure. Social media continued to drive public discourse, with hashtags related to the royal crisis trending globally. Speed and intensity of online discussion created challenges for palace communication staff, who struggled to respond to rumors and misinformation in real time. William personally reviewed social media sentiment reports throughout the day, understanding that public opinion was being shaped as much by online discussion as by traditional media coverage. The day concluded with a private dinner meeting between William and Catherine, their first opportunity for extended personal conversation since the crisis began. Both were exhausted from the intensity of the past 48 hours, but they used the time to plan their approach for the challenges ahead. They discussed the impact on their children, who had begun asking questions about the unusual activity around their home and the presence of additional security personnel. William and Catherine agreed to maintain as much normal routine as possible while preparing age-appropriate explanations for the public attention their family was receiving. The conversation also covered the possibility that the monarchy might need to undergo fundamental changes to survive. Both understood that their eventual reign, whenever it might begin, would likely look very different from previous royal eras. The crisis was forcing an evolution that might have taken decades to occur naturally. As the second day of the crisis concluded, William had established himself as the de facto leader of the royal response. His combination of transparency, accountability, and determination to preserve the institution while reforming its practices had prevented complete disaster while leaving significant challenges ahead. The path forward remained uncertain, but William had demonstrated the leadership qualities necessary to navigate unprecedented circumstances. The monarchy's survival would depend on his ability to continue balancing competing pressures while maintaining public trust during the most difficult period in modern royal history. The weight of leadership had settled firmly on his shoulders, and there was no turning back from the transformative process he had initiated. The third day of the crisis marked a crucial turning point when William made the decision that would define his legacy and the future of the British monarchy. Standing before the assembled media at 10 a.m. outside Buckingham Palace, he announced the establishment of an independent royal review commission that would have unprecedented access to royal finances, operations, and decision-making processes. The British people deserve complete transparency from their institutions, William declared, his voice carrying new authority born from the crucible of crisis. Today, I am announcing the creation of an independent commission with full powers to investigate any and all aspects of royal operations. We will hold nothing back and will implement whatever reforms are recommended. The announcement sent shockwaves through both the royal establishment and the broader political system. Never before had the monarchy voluntarily subjected itself to such comprehensive external scrutiny. Senior palace officials privately expressed horror at the precedent being set, while constitutional experts debated the implications for royal prerogative and institutional independence. The commission would be chaired by a former Supreme Court justice and include financial experts, constitutional scholars, and representatives from civil society organizations. Their mandate would cover not only the specific allegations that had triggered the crisis, but also broader questions about royal accountability, transparency, and public funding. Public reaction to William's announcement was overwhelmingly positive. Polling conducted immediately after his statement showed a significant recovery in royal approval ratings, particularly among younger demographics who had been most critical during the first 2 days of the crisis. Social media sentiment shifted markedly, with many praising William's courage in embracing such comprehensive reform. International observers were equally impressed by the bold nature of William's response. Editorial writers in major newspapers across the Commonwealth praised the move as evidence of institutional maturity and adaptability. Republican movements found their arguments somewhat deflated by the monarchy's willingness to undergo such radical self-examination. Behind the scenes, William was working tirelessly to manage the complex logistics of the commission's establishment while maintaining royal duties and family responsibilities. The process required coordination with government lawyers, consultation with parliamentary officials, and careful negotiation with family members who would be subject to investigation. The most challenging aspect was gaining cooperation from family members who were directly implicated in the allegations under investigation. Some senior royals initially resisted the idea of external oversight, arguing that the monarchy's traditional independence was being compromised. William's response was direct and uncompromising. The alternative to voluntary transparency was potential abolition. Catherine played a crucial role in family negotiations, using her position as an outsider who had married into the royal family to bridge divides between traditional perspectives and reformist approaches. Her conversations with family members often focused on the practical reality that public expectations had fundamentally changed and that adaptation was essential for survival. The Commission's first public hearing was scheduled for the following week, but preliminary work began immediately. Teams of investigators were granted access to financial records dating back 20 years. Former palace employees were invited to provide confidential testimony. External auditors began reviewing investment strategies and tax arrangements. The thoroughness of the investigation surprised even William's closest advisors. Documents were being analyzed by forensic accountants who typically worked on major corporate fraud cases. Constitutional experts were examining the legal basis for various royal privileges and exemptions. Public administration specialists were reviewing operational procedures and decision-making processes. International legal experts were brought in to provide comparative analysis of how other constitutional monarchies handled transparency and accountability. The Commission studied models from Scandinavia, the Netherlands, and other countries where royal families had successfully adapted to modern expectations while maintaining their institutional roles. The investigation's scope expanded as preliminary findings revealed additional areas of concern. Investment strategies that had seemed reasonable when implemented years earlier now appeared questionable in light of current ethical standards. Operational procedures that had developed organically over decades were found to lack proper oversight and accountability mechanisms. William spent considerable time during this period preparing for his own testimony before the Commission. Unlike previous royal appearances before parliamentary committees or public inquiries, this would involve detailed questioning about personal decisions, financial arrangements, and institutional practices. His legal advisors warned that the questioning would be rigorous and that there could be no reliance on traditional royal dignity to avoid difficult topics. The preparation process was itself transformative for William. Reviewing decades of royal operations from an external perspective revealed patterns and problems that had been invisible from inside the institution. The experience reinforced his conviction that fundamental reform was necessary and that the crisis had provided an essential opportunity for institutional renewal. Media coverage during this period shifted from crisis reporting to analysis of the reform process itself. Journalists who had initially focused on exposing royal wrongdoing began examining the broader implications of the Transparency Initiative. Constitutional experts provided ongoing commentary about the precedents being set and their potential impact on other public institutions. The international dimension of the story continued to evolve as other Commonwealth countries watched the British monarchy's adaptation process. Some observers suggested that successful reform in the United Kingdom might strengthen rather than weaken the Commonwealth connection, as it would demonstrate the institution's ability to evolve with changing times. William's leadership during this transformative period required him to balance multiple competing pressures. He needed to maintain family unity while implementing reforms that some relatives opposed. He had to preserve royal dignity while embracing unprecedented transparency. He was required to uphold constitutional traditions while fundamentally altering how those traditions were practiced. The personal cost of this leadership became apparent to those closest to William. The stress of managing institutional transformation while dealing with family tensions and constant media scrutiny was enormous. Catherine later described this period as the most challenging of their marriage, as William struggled with the weight of responsibility for both family and institution. Yet the process also revealed William's strengths as a future monarch. His ability to remain calm under pressure, his willingness to make difficult decisions, and his skill at building consensus among diverse stakeholders all proved crucial during the transformation period. Traditional royal training had not prepared him for this situation, but his personal character and modern perspective proved equal to the challenge. The Commission's work began producing results even before formal hearings commenced. Preliminary recommendations included immediate changes to financial reporting procedures, enhanced oversight of royal investments, and new protocols for managing potential conflicts of interest. William announced that these recommendations would be implemented immediately, demonstrating his commitment to meaningful reform rather than cosmetic changes. Public engagement with the reform process exceeded all expectations. Town hall meetings were organized across the country to gather citizen input on royal accountability measures. Online platforms were established to receive suggestions and comments from the public. University students were invited to submit research papers on constitutional monarchy in the modern era. This unprecedented level of public participation in royal reform created a sense of national conversation about the monarchy's future role. Rather than being a crisis imposed on the institution from outside, the process became a collaborative effort to adapt one of the world's oldest institutions to 21st century expectations. As the transformation period concluded, William had successfully converted the greatest crisis in modern royal history into an opportunity for institutional renewal. The monarchy that would emerge from the investigation would be fundamentally different from its predecessors, more transparent, more accountable, and more directly connected to the public it served. The risk William had taken in embracing such comprehensive reform was enormous, but the alternative had been institutional decline and potential abolition. By the end of this transformative period, the foundations had been laid for a modernized monarchy that could maintain its constitutional role while meeting contemporary expectations for public institutions. The future remained uncertain, but William had demonstrated that even ancient institutions could adapt and survive when led by individuals willing to embrace necessary change, regardless of personal or institutional cost. 6 months after the crisis that nearly toppled the British monarchy, Prince William stood before Parliament to present the final report of the Independent Royal Review Commission. The document in his hands represented the most comprehensive examination of royal operations in the institution's 1,000-year history, and contained recommendations that would fundamentally alter how the monarchy operated in the modern era. The parliamentary chamber was packed as William began his address, marking the first time a future monarch had voluntarily appeared before the full legislature to account for institutional conduct. His presence represented not just personal accountability, but a symbolic transfer of authority from ancient privilege to democratic legitimacy. 6 months ago, this institution faced its greatest crisis in modern times. William began, his voice carrying the gravitas that months of leadership under pressure had given him. Today I stand before you not to defend past mistakes, but to present a roadmap for a monarchy that serves the British people with complete transparency and unwavering accountability. The Commission's findings were damning in some areas while revealing institutional strengths in others. Financial irregularities dating back decades were confirmed, resulting in voluntary payments to the Treasury totaling over £40 million in back taxes and penalties. Personal conduct issues involving several family members had been substantiated, leading to reduced public roles for those individuals and enhanced oversight of all royal activities. More significantly, The investigation had revealed systematic problems with royal operations that went far beyond individual misconduct. Decision-making processes lacked proper oversight. Financial management operated with insufficient transparency. Public funding was used inefficiently, and there were inadequate mechanisms for ensuring royal activities aligned with contemporary public expectations. William's presentation of these findings was unflinching in its honesty. He acknowledged mistakes, accepted responsibility for institutional failures, and committed to implementing every one of the Commission's 97 recommendations. The comprehensive nature of the reform package demonstrated his understanding that cosmetic changes would be insufficient to restore public trust. The new framework established by the Commission created unprecedented transparency requirements. All royal finances would be subject to annual independent audit with public disclosure of major expenditures and investment strategies. Royal diaries would be published quarterly showing how public funds supported official duties. Ethical guidelines would govern all royal activities with independent oversight of compliance. Perhaps most revolutionary was the establishment of a permanent Royal Accountability Board, with authority to investigate complaints, monitor compliance with ethical guidelines, and recommend sanctions for violations. The board would include representatives from Parliament, civil society, and the general public, ensuring ongoing democratic oversight of royal operations. The public response to William's parliamentary address and the Commission's final report was overwhelmingly positive. Polling showed that royal approval ratings had not only recovered to pre-crisis levels, but had actually exceeded them. The transparency and accountability measures implemented during the reform process had created unprecedented public confidence in royal operations. International reaction was equally favourable. Constitutional monarchies worldwide began studying the British reform model for potential adaptation to their own systems. Republican movements in Commonwealth countries found their arguments weakened by the monarchy's successful evolution. Political scientists hailed the process as a masterclass in institutional adaptation under pressure. The personal impact on William had been profound. The crisis and its aftermath had accelerated his development as a leader and forced him to confront fundamental questions about monarchy's role in democratic society. His handling of the transformation had earned respect across the political spectrum and established his credentials for eventual kingship. Catherine's role throughout the crisis had also evolved significantly. Initially supporting William privately while maintaining public composure, she had gradually become more involved in the reform process itself. Her perspective as someone who had chosen to join the royal family provided valuable insights into how the institution could better connect with contemporary British society. The children had been remarkably resilient throughout the upheaval, though the experience had certainly shaped their understanding of royal responsibility. William and Catherine had used the crisis as an opportunity to teach their children about accountability, public service, and the importance of adapting to meet legitimate public expectations. Family relationships had been tested by the crisis and reform process. Some senior royals never fully accepted the need for such comprehensive changes and maintained private criticism of William's approach. Others, however, came to appreciate how the reforms had strengthened rather than weakened the institution's long-term prospects. King Charles's health had gradually improved during the transformation period, allowing him to resume limited public duties and provide ongoing guidance to William. The father-son collaboration during the crisis had strengthened their relationship and established clear expectations for the eventual transition to William's reign. The financial impact of the reforms was substantial but manageable. Beyond the voluntary tax payments, implementation of new oversight systems and transparency measures required significant investment. However, these costs were offset by increased efficiency in royal operations and enhanced public support for royal funding. The constitutional implications of the reforms were still being analysed by legal experts. Some argued that the monarchy's voluntary subjection to democratic oversight had fundamentally altered the constitutional balance. Others contended that the reforms had strengthened rather than weakened the institution by demonstrating its compatibility with contemporary democratic values. 1 year after the crisis began, William reflected on the transformation during a private interview with constitutional historians. He acknowledged that the process had been extraordinarily difficult, but emphasized that it had been essential for the monarchy's survival. The alternative to voluntary reform had been gradual irrelevance and eventual abolition. The lessons learned during the crisis had broader implications for institutional leadership in the modern era. William's willingness to embrace transparency, accept accountability, and implement comprehensive reforms had demonstrated how ancient institutions could adapt to contemporary expectations without losing their essential character. The reformed monarchy that emerged from the crisis was recognizably the same institution that had served Britain for centuries, but it operated according to principles that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. The combination of traditional ceremonial roles with modern accountability measures created a unique model for constitutional monarchy in the democratic age. Public engagement with royal activities increased dramatically following the reforms. Quarterly financial reports were widely read and discussed. Citizens felt empowered to ask questions about royal activities through newly established feedback mechanisms. The monarchy had become more accessible while maintaining its dignity and constitutional role. Educational institutions worldwide began studying the British royal transformation as an example of successful institutional adaptation. Business schools examined the crisis management and change leadership aspects. Political science programs analyzed the constitutional and democratic implications. Public administration courses highlighted the transparency and accountability measures. As William looked toward his eventual accession to the throne, he understood that he would inherit an institution fundamentally different from the one his ancestors had led. The crown he would eventually wear would be lighter in some ways, freed from the burden of hidden practices and questionable arrangements, but heavier in others, weighted with unprecedented accountability and democratic legitimacy. The crisis that had begun with leaked documents and media investigations had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy. By embracing rather than resisting necessary change, William had demonstrated that even the most traditional institutions could evolve to meet contemporary expectations while preserving their essential purpose and dignity. The British monarchy entering the latter years of the 2020s was more transparent, more accountable, and more directly connected to the people it served than at any point in its history. The transformation had been painful but necessary, and it had been accomplished through leadership that combined respect for tradition with courage to embrace essential change. The crown had been renewed, and the future king who would eventually wear it had proven himself worthy of the trust that democratic accountability requires. The 1,000-year institution would continue, but on terms that reflected 21st century values, while honoring its historical purpose and constitutional role. William's greatest test as a future monarch had ended not in defeat but in triumph. The triumph of institutional adaptation over institutional decline, of democratic legitimacy over inherited privilege, and of transparent accountability over traditional opacity. The monarchy's future was more secure than it had been before the crisis, built on foundations that could withstand the pressures of the modern democratic era. The prince who had stepped up during the darkest hours had emerged as the king the nation would need for the challenges ahead.